Hello, and welcome to week 18 of our 2-year Bible study. This week we get into Numbers chapter 1 through 7. Numbers actually begins as an incredibly celebratory book. The people have been rescued from Egypt through the Exodus. They have been at Mount Sinai for about a year, and they are now ready to turn towards Israel, towards the promised land, and begin to move towards it. The difficult part, of course, is that the book begins with a census, and this is not an easy read by any stretch of the imagination, but the census counting is important. God is faithful to his covenant to make Abraham's descendants numerous. And so the numbers here are really a recognition of God's blessing on the people. There's been quite a bit of question as to whether we can trust the numbers, and there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding the numbers. There are all sorts of different ways of looking at this. We're not going to get into the weeds of all of that. I think some approaches are a little bit better than other approaches, but all of them have problems. In other words, there is no one solution to consistently say, if we follow exactly what's here or we make these adjustments to it, that it consistently is applied across to everything. And so I'm comfortable with how they are, but I recognize that others would disagree. Either way, there needs to be a fairly significant number of people that are included in the numbers of the Israelites. And that could be anywhere from 250,000 people upwards to 2.5 million. I tend to lean towards the latter number and take the numbers that scripture gives us at face value for a variety of reasons. But there are those who would disagree with that and adjust the inconsistencies that come up when you take a tenth of it off. So anywhere from 250,000 to 2.5 million people. Irrespective of how this is understood, this is an extremely joyful chapter that we are miserable reading through because it's just numbers and names of people that we really don't know. And so I think we need to, at least, even if it's still difficult for us to read through it, to recognize that this is a declaration that God himself is fulfilling everything that he has said to Abraham. So if he has rescued the people from Egypt, if he has given them his law to live by, if he is fulfilling the promises to Abraham, surely the promised land just lies ahead. Well, Numbers chapter 2, we have an arrangement of the camp, so we can see how the different tribes are arranged. Not really a whole lot of theological elements there. The only one that might be pulled out is that Judah, based on the census, has the most number of people, and it's also on the east side of the tabernacle, the east side being the side that the opening of the holy place and holy of holies faces, and so it's an honored position that Judah has. But the other positions of other tribes, I'm not sure that there's a whole lot of theological components around the arrangement of the camp. In Numbers chapter 3, we have the different clans of the Levites and also a short discussion on the substitution for all the firstborn. So all the firstborn males in Israel need to be substituted by a Levite, or they had to pay an amount to substitute for the firstborn, because the firstborn are God's because of what happened in Egypt with the Passover. You also have in chapter 5, in chapter 4, you have the different traveling responsibilities of the Levites, who is going to care for, what parts of the tabernacle in terms of transporting it. And then in Numbers chapter 5, we have impurity described as it's been described in our study of Leviticus as a removal from the camp. Now, presumably, the people are still traveling with them, but just not in their midst. And so Anytime that there were infectious skin diseases or other ceremonially unclean elements that, again, we went through in our study of Leviticus, they would still travel with them. And putting them outside the camp didn't mean that they were deserted in the middle of nowhere, but that they also couldn't be within the community as well. There is some laws on the restitution for wrongs, and restitution must be made, even when no restitution is possible. So there needs to be a making right, a justice that is tied to the Israelites in order to make sure that not only are again, we are seeing kind of this recognition that we need to be right with God, so cleanness, uncleanness, but we need to be right with others, restitution between others. And so loving God, loving others, we see here. And then we have a law about, or a story about, and not really a story, a ritual practice of the test for unfaithfulness. Now, I want to go through this and kind of clear up some things that are probably a little confusing as we go through this. This is verses 11 through 31 of Numbers chapter 5. So an accusation that a wife has been unfaithful is hypothetically brought before the priests in verse 15. And notice that the accused is being the accused of being brought before God, and that this liquid is prepared. And so there is holy water, so probably water used for cleansing within the tabernacle. Some dust from the tabernacle floor, so some of the presence of the holy place is kind of mixed together in this preparation liquid. And the accused is placed under an oath and is promised acquittal in verses 19 through 23. And then the liquid is given to the accused, and a dedication offering is presented in verses 24 through 26. And this is important because again, as we're going to get to in just a moment, there's nothing magical about the liquid. There's nothing magical that it's holy water touched, the floor of the tabernacle. It's none of that. We're going to see in a moment kind of how this really should be thought of. But that dedication offering, I think, is important because in the dedication offering, what you're saying is that there's nothing between me and God, and I'm dedicating my whole self to him. Well, if the accused is guilty, then she is offering a bad dedication offering, an unholy dedication offering, which has all sorts of ramifications to it. However, if she is innocent, this dedication offering is saying that she's offering herself fully to God's justice. And so that dedication offering ought not to be overlooked. But the outcome of whether she's guilty or innocent is discussed in verses 27 through 28. Now, there are differences here from pagan forms of testing infidelity. So this test is not unusual for this time frame. If a husband thought that his wife was unfaithful. However, there are clear differences between the way that it is described in the book of Numbers and the way that we know that it was performed in other cultures around Israel. For instance, in the pagan forms, the revealing agent in this form is the liquid being drunk, the woman drinking the liquid. But in other pagan forms, the revealing agent is perhaps fire. So she might have to, have fire either burn her, next to her body or placed on it or near it. She might have to put her hand in scalding water or something of that nature. The revealing agent in these pagan forms is harmful to both the innocent and the guilty. Right. So if I'm innocent and I have to put my hand in scalding water, I'm still innocent, but I've been harmed, right? And if I'm guilty and I put my hand in this scalding water, then I'm harmed also. In this, the way it's laid out in Numbers chapter 5, the water poses no threat to either the innocent or the guilty. And so it doesn't cause the innocent to suffer for something that she hasn't done. And so in the pagan forms, the accused needed to survive whatever that ordeal was. They had to survive something that was inherently harmful. In other words, they were guilty until they were proven innocent. Here, it's genuinely open. There is no indication of whether the woman is guilty or innocent in any of this. And in fact, in verse 14, it says, if feelings of jealousy come over her husband, he suspects his wife and she is impure. Or if he is jealous and suspects her, even though she is not impure. See, so verse 14 genuinely allows there to be an openness that the person is considered innocent until, by God's judgment, as we're going to see in a moment, they are proven guilty. So the guilt in a pagan situation was determined by the response to the harmful ordeal, but the punishment was determined separately. And so not only did you, so you were harmed either way, whether you're guilty or innocent. And then on top of that, you had some kind of punishment determined that further harmed you. Here, the penalty is the outcome. So if the woman was unfaithful, the penalty was going to be the outcome. The test did not harm either the innocent or the guilty in any way. And in the pagan forms, the punishment is immediate. Here in Numbers chapter 5, no time is determined. So it doesn't suggest that, while she's standing there, all the effects of, this liquid come upon her. That's not, there is no time that's determined here. So in short, in Numbers chapter 5, there's a God centrality of this approach that prevents a jealous or an angry or a bitter or narcissistic husband from meting out punishment by falsely accusing his wife. In other words, this is really protecting the woman against a man who may or may not be rightly accusing her of something. This is really the emphasis of this particular passage. This is completely theocentric rather than magical. So the liquid has no magical properties. It is God who is revealing what is going on here. It is God that the woman is brought before. It is God who gives out the punishment for those who are guilty. And it is God to whom the offering, an offering of dedication, by the way, is given. The woman is either truthfully or falsely dedicating herself to God, knowing she knows whether she is innocent or guilty. And so that just furthers the punishment, kind of doubles down on the punishment that God would give to her if she is giving a dedication offering and yet she knows she's guilty. And so you notice how all of that is God-centric, not human-centric. So while there are rituals to go through, it is actually protective of the innocent woman to a degree unseen during that time. Notice how much of what is in chapter 5 follows with fellow kinspeople, the relationship with God through sacrifices. So the impurity, the restitution, the faithfulness, unfaithfulness to God. All of this kind of parallels the impurity, the restitution, the faithfulness, unfaithfulness with that relationship with each other. And so again, we kind of see those parallels between, if I love God, I need to love my neighbor. If I love my neighbor well, I am showing that I truly love God. Well, in chapter 6, we have what is called the Nazirite vow. And we're going to kind of return to this a number of different times throughout Scripture. Probably the two most famous people who were Nazirites are Samson in the book of Judges, and probably John the Baptist had a Nazirite vow. Now, that Nazarite vow is not the same as a Nazarene. So Jesus was a Nazarene because he came from the town of Nazareth. So Nazareth and Nazarene are connected to each other. Nazareth is the town. Nazarene is a person who comes from that town. A Nazarite is a vow that has been made to God for either a lifetime or a certain time frame to show self-control and discipline and dedication to God. So we don't want to confuse Nazarite with Nazarene or Nazarite with Nazareth, because those are two separate types of things. At the very end of chapter 6, you see a priestly blessing, and you will oftentimes hear this blessing during church services and other other different occasions that pastor will give this blessing. It's a very, very common blessing, both for the Old Testament believers as well as the New Testament believers. And this is the blessing that God gave to Aaron to bless the people with. And finally, we get to Numbers chapter 7, where there is, again, a very long chapter and a repetitive chapter, which neither of those two things bodes well for our current culture. But what I find interesting, this is the offerings of the dedication of the tabernacle. What I find interesting to this is that rather than summarizing all the tribes, I mean, this entire chapter could be done in, I don't know what, just a few, each, so the first one from the offering is 13 through 17, so 4 verses long. So in 4 verses you could have said every single tribe gave this amount, this amount, this amount, this amount, and could have summarized it all. But each tribe, I think this is a theological component here, each tribe has its own listing and gift given, so therefore there's equal honor before God of all the tribes, and they are all recognized by God. So there's a sense in which there's a community action happening here, but there's also this sense in which there is an individual component to this. And of course, we have talked quite a bit in our studies already about how communal Scripture is, and it is very communal, far more communal than we are comfortable with in American culture. But there is this individualism. There is this sense of God recognizes what everybody gives and knows, and there's honor to that. And I think Numbers chapter 7 reminds us of that. At the very end of the chapter, we see that God is speaking to Moses, and when he speaks to Moses, he speaks from, it says in verse 89, from between the 2 cherubim above the atonement cover on the Ark of the Covenant of the Law. So when Moses goes into the Holy of Holies, or whether he went into the whole, I think he probably went into the holy place. I'm not sure that he went into the Holy of Holies, but maybe he was a unique character who was allowed to go in there more often than the high priest. But either way, the voice was coming from between the cherubim. And so again, we have this sense that in the Ark of the Covenant, we have a unique, focused presence of God. He doesn't take human form at any point in terms of the Ark of the Covenant, but his voice comes from between there because this is his unique focused presence. He is everywhere. He is fully everywhere at all times, and yet somehow in that Ark of the Covenant, there's a unique expression of his presence that is focused there. And so the voice that Moses communicates with back and forth, we get a glimpse of how that happens here at the end of chapter 7. So these are not easy chapters for us to read, and I know for some of us they are very long chapters to read, and yet there is still a reminder of both the blessing and faithfulness that God has towards his people, and also that God recognizes his people and recognizes what they do, and will hold them accountable for those who are guilty, but also give blessing to those who are innocent.